Salima, the sort of broad facts is that she teaches art at National College of Arts. She's also, in terms of this exhibition that we have in the art gallery, the main person responsible for it. But those of us who have known Chimi in a different capacity, and the other side of her has been as an activist, not only in terms of her own expression in both theatre and art, but as even a street activist, and a feminist in the sense that we have seen the evolution, in a way, of Chimi. What she's also done, which I found extremely exciting, is that she has been working for some years on something that maybe she should not have been doing, but other academics, is looking at art also at a conceptual level and the history of art. And she is also writing a book. So it's unusual when we get an artist who's writing a book, and by writing a book, it's not just a question of collecting paintings and reproducing them in book covers, but actually reflecting on the process. Above all, and perhaps she epitomizes best, that she is a feminist in all its dimensions.
As I said the other day when we started, that I feel highly intimidated. आप सब लोगों को लफ्ज़ों में इतना ज़्यादा अबूर है, और मेरा जो काम जो दूसरा है, क्योंकि जहाँ तक एक्टिंग का ताल्लुक है तो मैं किसी और की स्क्रिप्ट पढ़ती हूँ, और अक्सर जो मेरा काम है वो करके बताने से उसका ताल्लुक है. So it's always difficult because all of you are people who express yourself with great clarity. But I took heart the other day from our workshop, in which when we were talking about our identities, one of the things that I had felt for a long time was this meshing of many different identities and the problem of dealing with them. I thought it was advancing senility actually. So लग रहा था कि जैसे जैसे उम्र गुजरती जा रही है कुछ सठा रही हूँ, लेकिन मुझे फिर दुरे ने बता दिया कि नहीं, ये तो it's a special to women, and it is we take heart from the fact that men have a problem of a unilinear identity and we have multiple identities, and we should revel in them and celebrate them. So I just thought I was confused, but what I'm talking about today, originally when Bunny asked me to do this, she said, you know, look at your own work and the evolution of what you have been doing in terms of the women's movement, and see how it's reflected in your work. I found I couldn't do that, honestly, without placing myself among other women who at various times in my life and in the history of painting in Pakistan have been important. I've just picked out almost at random what is a very personal survey of issues to do with women in painting, in art in Pakistan. I'd like you to show you those first, about 20 or 25 slides, 47 onwards, up to the current day, and then perhaps talk about my work. Because I feel that unless you have a whole picture, it's strange that my work has evolved the way that it has. I'd like you perhaps to look at other things that I've considered important. There are huge gaps. There are lots of people I'm not going to mention, not that they haven't had an influence or haven't been in dialogue with them, because I've said this, Mani's mentioned this book. I think for a year or more I've been thinking about and working on a book of women painters, which I've called Unveiling the Visible. I've already got the title, I haven't written the book. But it has been a very humbling experience, and I've learned so much in talking to women. There's such a richness that I've experienced just in being with them. And I hope some of it at least will come through in the book once it's ready. But so there are big gaps, because I've met women, you know, from Peshawar to Ahmedabad to Hyderabad to Multan to wherever. But I'm just picking out a few people because of the issues that they illustrate. I hope all of you can see, and those that can't will have to squint. I'm starting with a painter whose work actually I'm not very close to, but who I acknowledge as being very important in the history of painting in Pakistan. It's Anna Malka Ahmed, who started the first academic fine arts department in Pakistan. And as I mentioned the other day, she started a department in 1940 and only women students were admitted, and the raison d'etre for the department was so that women don't clutter up more important departments like physics and chemistry. This was supposed to be the British Raj, and I don't think our attitudes have changed much, except that of course women by their brashness and merit have invaded all departments, not only of the university but everywhere else also. A point that I want to make is that while Anna Malka and the department that she stands for has really stuck to the British academic tradition in painting, I think in her own work she has been a tremendous activist, and she has taken up issues as and when she felt moved to. She's taken up the issues, social issues and political and historical issues. And I think she's been a very gutsy lady vis-a-vis her fight to establish art as an activity within the pristine confines of the Punjab University. And it's been a lifelong struggle for her, and I really take my hat off. A woman who's totally unknown. I've come across her in the last 5 years. It's Ismat Rahim. I wonder how many people have ever heard that name. No one, probably. She was J. Rahim's wife, also of foreign origin, like Anna Malka. She's always known as wife of Esther Rahim, more recently as mother of Sikandar Rahim. I've seen a lot of her work. Originally, I mistook it for Amrita Shergill, and I'm currently writing a monograph on her also. She died in 1964. And looking at the work that she did in her last years, I was quite stunned. This is an earlier work that she did in the 40s. But her work highlights the fact that because she was married to a very important person, her work was of very little consequence, except when it was convenient for her to indulge in it. This is one of the works that she did in her last years. I'm sorry, it's a pretty poor slide because it was taken on a very cloudy day in a balcony in Washington. I'm trying to focus it. That's okay. It's a self-portrait, like a lot of her works in the last years, and there are these skulls. The work became very surrealist, very intensely personal, quite somber and frightening, but in a strange way, very, very compelling. It reminded me a lot of Farida Kahlo, and they were almost contemporaries actually. Perhaps Farida Kahlo was about 10 years older. I don't think that Esther was aware of Farida Kahlo's work. But I think once she comes into the mainstream, I'm trying to write a monograph on her at the same time. Once we have a retrospective in Pakistan, which I'm hoping we will have, I think we can look at her work as somebody who was important and quite hidden from history. Zubair Aka taught me that it is possible to devote yourself to this activity called painting. And apart from the fact that she was a pioneer in abstract painting and in abstract expression, I think the single-mindedness with which she has devoted herself to this activity, because of course one of the problems that I and many others like me have come across is this business of how important is this activity to you? Where do the conflicts come in with all the other roles that you perform? Musarrat Mirza, who is a very solitary figure, lives in Hyderabad, comes from Sakkar. Her work is, if one wants to classify a term, in the British academic tradition perhaps, but I think goes far beyond it. I think she is able to abstract her experience of being solitary, of being well, Sufi in her philosophical leanings. The intense quietness that one finds is almost like a shout in her work. She studies the small corners in the home, outside, a street in Sakhar, a shaft of light, a dark corner, a step, sky, a bird. There are 3 of her works in the exhibition. And she's not a person who's ever talked about wanting to do something specifically about women's issues, but talking about this exhibition, so she herself offered to work for 2 months, and she produced the 3 paintings that are in the show. Rajni Sura, who is a painter whose work disturbs me greatly, so I put it in. It disturbs me because here is an example of a woman who is imitating the male gaze as it looks upon the female body. I don't think that there is an intimacy with the female body here, but it is as though she is looking through male eyes. And that is another thing that I have been interested in my own work, in other women's work. At what point are we able to become women? How far is our visual imagery taken from our male mentors? Nazir Shatawala is a painter and a friend who first made me aware of the possibilities of female imagery in a personal manner that I had not really explored before, of picking out images which are very female, like for example the shell. She used it in her own painting and sort of made a link between the shell and the chadar. That intrigued me. I think it set off a whole new train of thought in my own work. Sumaya Durani, who was one of my students at one time before she went abroad to study, it's her sense of humor and her liveliness and tremendous energy that has been an inspiration for me. This very tongue-in-cheek collage of her wedding portrait. You know, as she said, that's me in the marriage market. And her parents love this painting, and that amuses her a great deal, because she says they don't realize it's a comment on something, you know, that they made me do. Nahid Raza, together with 2 or 3 other painters in Karachi, have been a constant source of support for me in the 80s when it was difficult to paint in the way that we wanted to paint. She has made the essence of the female, if you like, her theme. It's a very strong theme in her work. And in which she looked at Egyptian ways of composition together with certain symbols that to her explained certain feelings, like the hand, like the circle. There's been a lot of dialogue between us, and I think we've helped one another to stay with what we felt close to. Meher Afroz is another painter who I deeply admire, who's also among these women from Karachi. Afroz is very close, I think, to the visual tradition. She's able to distill essences. She's able to distill the folk. She's able to distill textures from walls, from clothes, from all kinds of things to which one feels a sensual attraction. A painter who I've really only come to know recently is Samina Matsuri, and I admire her already tremendously. She trained as a graphic designer, but now she's almost, she's given that up, and she's teaching painting, and she's a painter. Because I think that intellectually she's able to evolve a very personal vocabulary. For example, this image that she used originally came from the fruit, the sharifa, and she was looking at the way it splits open, and the feeling of fecundity, which I think is very essential to women, the feeling of having seeds and exploring that whole aspect of one's body. I think her 2 paintings in the exhibition book are quite remarkable because she's beginning to look at materials that we usually don't use, which is encaustic, for example. Niloufar Akmut is a painter and a sculptor who is living away from Pakistan now, but she keeps coming back and forth, and I think she draws a lot of her inspiration. She was also my student at one time. She's done a very wonderful installation on the women of partition recently in Birmingham, and I want very much that her work should be seen in Pakistan, but unfortunately it's large, it's difficult to, and she's also suffering from a spinal problem, so it's difficult for her to live here right now for medical reasons. But she did this whole series of the women hidden from view, the women who were equal participants. It was a very large installation, and this is just a very small part of it. I learned a lot from my students, I think, over the last 24 years of teaching. One of them has been the courage to paint one's experience. I think coming away from this whole business of the Eurocentric male way of training painters, paint 5 landscape, paint 2 still lifes, paint 3-figure compositions with not more than 3 figures or more than 5 figures and all that sort of stuff. I think slowly one has realized that that is perhaps not the way to arrive at a personal and fulfilling vocabulary. Nina Zubair was one of the painters who used the experience of her mother's illness, the brain tumor that her mother had, nursing her mother, and this was one of the paintings that came out of it. It's a very striking, very painful painting actually. It's a portrait of her mother with these multiple cells that were killing her. Another student who has not painted after this, because this painting was probably one of the last that she did of the predicament that she was in, which was nursing a paralyzed mother. Another one of the issues that I have come across, this business of your other roles become paramount, and the guilt that you feel if you give time to your work. And all women who have been doing, well, not just writing or other creative, but everything, that the way that you are torn apart when you have to choose, the guilt that you carry with you when you decide to give your time and your focus to your work. And Ruby, unfortunately, has not been able to paint because she's looking after her mother. And I felt her work always was very powerful. It's very emotional. Sabina Gilani is a painter now who's working her way through college in England very courageously, making money from what she sells and then paying her fees and whatever. She was one of the painters, printmaker she's actually, who was drawing very strongly from the nude figure at a time when it was not possible to really exhibit these things easily. An amusing thing that happened, of course, when she went to Canada was she suddenly found that feminists disagreed with the fact that she was using the nude. So then that brought to me this whole business of context and how here the nude for women means something totally different to it does to a woman painter in the West, for example, where it doesn't carry the same feeling of rebellion, the need to unclothe to say something important in this context, in the Pakistani context, is quite different to the way it's viewed in another culture. So context as a talking point in creativity was something that came about. Shazia Sikhandhari, a young miniature painter who's now no longer doing miniatures because she's doing her master's at the Rhode Island School of Design, and just 3 weeks ago I was looking at her new work and discussing with her this whole business of tradition and how somebody who's schooled in a particular form of tradition is going to come to grips with a contemporary expression. And the struggle that's going on now in her work is quite amazing to see, and I'm very excited by what's going to happen after that, which is a very focused person. Now, the class that graduated this year taught me a lot. Faiza, who's doing these wonderful paintings about women, women's experiences. I think her triptych called Wedding Album and the other single painting called Separate Beds in the exhibition are quite charming. She's drawn from very many different sources. She's looked at Frida Kahlo, she's looked at naive painting, but she's looked very hard at truck painting, truck and rickshaw painting. And she's deriving a lot of her color, a lot of her imagery. She does these wonderful buraks that are going through windows, and with these women looking longingly at them. Ambition in terms of attacking large projects. That's another thing I've learned from my students. Farida, she was probably sitting over here. I was quite intimidated when she decided she was going to, attack this very, very large wall outside the department, National College of Arts. But the way she set about it, the discipline with which she worked, her time, her ability to see the small as well as the large, I think taught me a lot, at least, about how one could approach a large piece of work. Up till now, there has been this business of, men do large paintings, women do small paintings. Well, not so for Farida. A very spontaneous painter, I think, is Masooma, who also has a small work in this exhibition. She also graduated this year. And I think the breakthrough in her vision and in mine together, looking at her work, came when she did. I asked them to do paintings which were very intensely personal and were really about things that were important to them. And Masooma did this wonderful painting just of a kurta, her grandmother's kurta. She feels very close to her grandmother. And it was just that. It was a wonderful painting in which one felt the malmal of the kurta, its embroidery. And I think it suddenly gave her an insight as to what her painting should be about. And it certainly added a big dimension in my understanding of how actually I should be approaching the teaching of painting. Coming to my own work, this is a very, very early painting, and I think Kishwar has it. Yes, I also trained in the, inverted commas, normal way, which was, I had mostly male teachers in England. This was not here, where they had all female teachers. I should mention here, of course, one of the reasons for starting this book was I suddenly realized that 90% of all art teaching in Pakistan is done by women. They all pioneered these institutions. They're staffing these institutions, whether in Abbottabad, whether in Peshawar University, Sindh University, Faisalabad, Degree College, everywhere you look, all the colleges in Karachi, every single one has a woman principal. Look at Lahore, whether it's the head of the department, Punjab University, National College of Arts, everywhere. All of art education is in their hand. Whether it's because it's considered a non-serious and unimportant area, so it can be left to the women, or whether there are other reasons. I hope to talk about that later in my book. But so this was very early work. I think from the beginning I did feel that things that I was experiencing, political issues and social issues, were important to me. As soon as I got out of art school, I dumped the still life bit and the landscape and the portrait bit. This painting came out of 1971. It was part of a series. Unfortunately, it's the only slide I have, and it's not of one of the paintings that I thought was successful. I called them Soni Dharti, and it was an ironic title because while we were singing Soni Dharti on television, each one of us knew what was happening to Soni Dharti, whether here or there. Us as the aggressors and them as the victims. And it was not easy to do that, nor easy to exhibit at the time. In between came television and motherhood and job and all the other things that stop us from doing what we think we ought to be doing. I think the turning point for me came in 78 and 79, just after Zia-ul Haq took over. This was a painting which I called Carnival, and I did it like 1 or 2 hours after Bhutto was hanged. And of course, being banned on television was very good for my painting. So I turned to this more private means of communication. And since then, I've been painting almost non-stop. In those years before, I painted barely like 6 paintings a year. After that, it's been a steady commitment to the activity. This was a work that I did, I think, in the month that Shoaib was arrested in '81. And it was simply standing outside my window and looking out, and it was spring. It was 9th of March, 1981. And I saw the leaves. I was very distracted. But suddenly, the idea of trees, life, decay, the cycle started coming, and that's when I seriously went back to painting. This was a little later. This was painting based on the Shatila and Sabra killings. I call this Sabra Morning. And it's a mixed media. Oil came from one of the photographs, one of the women lying dead in the camp. And of course this, if you can recognize it, bits and pieces were taken from photographs of the February the 12th march in Lahore. To my regret, I must say I was not part of the march because I was painting that day. And I've forgotten who it was who called me and said, this is coming out. And I sort of debated and I thought कि वो तो दो करके जा रहे हैं, कोई मसला ही नहीं होगा, वो क्या आ जाएंगे, मुझे तो सिर्फ वो देना है, कागज ही देना है ना हाई कोर्ट में, कोई ऐसी बात मेरी ज़रूरत नहीं होगी. Of course, 3 hours later I discovered कि मेरी बहुत सख्त ज़रूरत थी. So I did part of the regret and part of the feelings I put into this painting, in which I used a lot of photographic images that were of the event of February 12th. And I called it The Wall, mainly because जो शहर के जो दीवार होते हैं उन पे तरह तरह के posters लगे होते हैं, वो उतर जाते हैं, कुछ रह जाते हैं, कुछ की एक आध लाइन रह जाती है. तो शहर के दीवार ही बताते हैं कि शहर पे क्या बीत रही है. लेकिन मेरे ख्याल में जो कुछ उस दिन बीती, वो शहर के दीवार पे उस तरह से नुमायां नहीं हुई जिस तरह से एक कबड्डी का मैच रह जाता है या कोई और जलसा रह जाता है. लेकिन हमारी तस्वीरें जो थी वो साफ हैं. मेरे ख्याल में मुझे शुक्रिया अदा करना है ज़ियाउल हक का बहुत ज़्यादा, क्योंकि पहली दफ़ा मुझे अपने कोई बदन का एहसास हुआ. I mean, it seems silly to say that I was already a mother and all the rest of it. But really, for the first time, I sort of started looking at my body as though, because I realized it was a threat. And, I sort of started feeling like, I have breasts and look at this. And it was a whole new way of trying to perceive or look at myself the way I was being looked at because I was a woman. And it helped me really a great deal in then analyzing the female body at both at a personal level and at a level that it becomes a threat, an object, a target, whatever. These were series that I called, some of them I called winter landscapes, because I was also aware of the aging of my body. But I used the upside down female figure because I wanted to use it like an image that was it didn't have the kind of visual presence in the way that we expect it to be, but like it was unexpected, it was upside down. And then I used bits and pieces out of newspapers and photographs and whatnot to pass over the body, and the body becoming transparent, as though it's absorbing everything like a sponge and then letting it out again. This is another one of the same series. Obviously, there was a problem in getting models. So a lot of the time I was using mirrors. I was persuading 1 or 2 friends to pose for me also. But it was a constant problem to do that. And I became aware of the fact that we are so, women find it very difficult to accept, disrobing in front of one another also, when it is for this kind of a looking activity. I was using some imagery that came out of placing the figure in different places, like I was using rillis, I was using ajraks, I was using different chadars, embroideries. And then I did a series in which I divided up my space into two areas. One was the public domain, which was to the right, and then there was a private domain that was to the left. And there was a kind of a contradiction, but there was also a dialogue between the two of them. And the figures were usually headless, for a variety of reasons. First, I didn't want them to make it a particular person. I also wanted to sarcastically suggest what the woman was over here, which was this body, you know, this object, if you like. And I was aware of the fact that I was treating it as just like that. So there was the rilli, which was joining up the two words. And I was using images in the right side. For example, there's a stone throwing boy, which is an image I got out of a South African event, a black man throwing. And then there was one. I was also looking at newspapers, and वो जो इश्तिहार आते हैं जंग में, उसमें हाथ होता है जो जोशियों का, और उसमें ये कि भी आपको दुबई का वीज़ा चाहिए, अच्छी शादी चाहिए वगैरह वगैरह, और उनको मैंने इकट्ठा करना शुरू कर दिया। उसकी वजह ये थी कि मुझे उसमें एक बेचारगी का भी एहसास होता था उनको देख के, और एक अलामत भी थी वो कि क्या चाहते हैं लोग, किस लिए जाते हैं, क्यों मालूम करना चाहते हैं क्या। And I was using them because I also find that the image of the hand is a very strong image. It's been there since the first man made the first drawing in the caves. The hand is there. And then of course it comes into our own imagery with the Panchtan Pound. And then it comes in every single of these advertisements also had the hand. This figure, the female form, जिसकी पीठ आपकी तरफ है, वो बाहर की तरफ देख रही है, लेकिन वो अंदर की तरफ भी देख रही है, क्योंकि वो तस्वीर के अंदर सब कुछ हो रहा है। ये अंदर और बाहर का जो रिश्ता है, जो ताल्लुक है, मेरे ख्याल में बहुत, मेरी तस्वीरों में बहुत ज़्यादा है। और ये मुझे कहने की ज़रूरत नहीं, क्योंकि इसके बारे में हम बहुत चीज़ बातचीत करते रहे कि ये हर औरत के एक्सपीरियंस का होता है। एक बाहर देखने का, जो क्योंकि आप अंदर होते हैं और बाहर देख रहे हैं, और एक ये कि अपने अंदर देखने का। ये दो एक ही सीरीज़ की हैं तस्वीरें, जिनमें I use the figure again looking out, and on the other side of the door there's a lot going on. Sometimes there's escape, sometimes there's passion, sometimes it's a storm, whatever. There's the inner tranquility, there's the onlooker, and then there's the outside. ये सीरीज थी जो कि 3-4 थी, और इनके अब कहीं आके वो सर्कल बना है। चादरों का ऑर्डर हो गया था कि जी आप सरकारी नौकर हैं तो आप चादर ओढ़ेंगे, और फिर मेरी बच्ची स्कूल जाने 10-11 साल की थी उस ज़माने में, उनका जी बच्चियाँ भी चादरें ओढ़ेंगी, और मैंने चादरें वो देखनी शुरू की, और कि अंदर में उनके चादरों में क्या नज़र आ रहा है। Is there somebody there? Is it only the chadar that is required? Nothing else. Maybe if we go away and just leave the chadars there, moving, inside and out, everybody will be happy, Just the chadar will be there. It doesn't need anyone inside it. It's an insistence on all women being the same and being anonymous. कोई नाम ना हो. ये सब चीज़ें जो थी मेरे जहन में थी जब मैं कुछ ऐसी तस्वीरें बनाई जिनमें सिर्फ उड़ती हुई चादरें थी और अंदर से वो खाली थी। ये 1-2 तस्वीरें थी जो मैं बनाई, जो कि अपने आप को शीशे में देख के मैंने बनाई थी, लेकिन इनके पीछे एक तूफान भी था, बारिश, बादल, गरज, चमक, और साथ ही साथ वो हाथ। Then came 83, 84, 85, MRD movement शुरू हुई। एकदम there was a lot of movement, a lot of political movement. There was seemed to be something going on. And at least I felt that now the body was in motion. And I did a lot of these series of a woman's body, which is, you know, making gestures up, around, and there's reaching out with the arms up there. There are clouds. There's some kind of a hope. There's also passion. There's blood, etc. I mean, that's being very literal, but the color red became very, very important for me. Police action in Lahore, in other places, the demonstrations, the brutality with which these demonstrations were broken up were the inspiration. And yet out of this then grew something else. I found myself doing a lot of flowers, like the body had flowers emerging out of it. और शायद ये एक गुस्सा था कि बेबसी का इजहार नहीं होगा, बल्कि इसमें से सारे जुम्बश में से सारे स्ट्रगल में से फूल निकलेंगे. This is one of the few times actually when I've worked on a male back, and it was really because there was a photograph that came out of a man who was in a demonstration, and I think it was either in Lahore or Karachi, I don't remember, and the police had pulled down his trousers, and they were in the bazaar, and they were beating him on his buttocks. And to me, suddenly, I felt a tremendous closeness to this man on the level of the body, which was so vulnerable. Itna sa to, you know, gosht ka lothra hi hota hai. And I felt a great wave of protectiveness towards this human being, towards, you know, what was happening to him. And this came out in a series of several of these drawings. I should mention here that I was working very small in all these years because there was no space to work big. And this is one of the things that I think women artists have a problem with, is that's why we've done embroideries for centuries, because we can fold it and put it under the pillow and put it under the bed, you know, doesn't get in anybody's way. And it's the same with small paintings, you know, I could just put them in anywhere where they were not. This was before I had a studio. This is just, I took out this painting because I had, somebody brought me a very wonderful choga, which was bright red. And I loved wearing it. And then I did a series just of these very flimsy, light little drawings in which it was my body wearing this choga, but then there was a swirl of all kinds of things going on around it. And it was at the same time as the earlier works that you've seen. And there were a lot of windows at that time in my work, and there still are. The window, a continuation of this business के बाहर देख रहे हैं, दरवाजे के बजाय वो खिड़कियां बन गई, खिड़कियों से बाहर झांकने वाली. ये तस्वीर जो कि अगर आप बहुत ज़्यादा गौर से देखें, राइट साइड पे एक फीमेल फिगर है और ये पौधे हैं सामने और बहुत सारे दरवाजे और खिड़कियां हैं. इस तस्वीर को लोग कई दफ़ा पूछते हैं, जिस तरह के आर्टिस्ट को अजीब चीज़ होती है कि अच्छा जी फिर आपकी इंस्पिरेशन कहाँ से आती है. अगर मैं आपको बताऊँ इस तस्वीर की इंस्पिरेशन कहाँ से आई तो फिर मेरे ख्याल में कि बहुत से भांडे फूट जाएंगे. ये हुआ ये कि एक फिल्म एक्ट्रेस, जिनका मैं नाम नहीं लूँगी, उन्होंने मुझे एक दिन फ़ोन किया और बहुत मशहूर हैं वो, तो मुझे कहने लगी कि मैंने आपकी एक तस्वीर ख़रीदनी, क्योंकि मैं अपना ड्राइंग रूम जो है वो रीडेकोरेट किया. उन्होंने बहुत नामवर एक डेकोरेटर का नाम लिया और कहा कि मुझे मेंटल पीस पे आपकी ये तस्वीर चाहिए. तो मैं कुछ परेशान सी हो गई, क्योंकि मेरा नहीं ख्याल था कि वो डेकोरेटर साहब या इनको कोई मेरे काम से ज़्यादा दिलचस्पी होगी, वो शायद भली भी ना लगे. तो मैंने कहा मैंने कभी कोई तस्वीरें देखी हैं? तो वो कहने लगी कि नहीं, मगर मेरी दोस्तें कहती हैं कि अच्छी. मैंने कहा आप जाके देख लीजिए, फलां जगह लगी हुई है, तो फिर आप कहने लगी लेकिन एक शर्त है कि वो उसमें रंग कोई ना हो, वो ब्लैक एंड वाइट हो. मैं ब्लैक एंड वाइट तस्वीर उस ज़माने में तो बनाई नहीं थी, तो मैं कुछ चुप से हो गई. मैंने कहा मैं कागज़ पे काम करती हूँ, मुझे बड़ी भी हो और ब्लैक एंड वाइट भी हो. तो खैर वो मैं भूल गई, क्योंकि मैं वो भी भूल गई होंगी। तो उनसे कहा था कि अगर आप जाके देख लें, अगर मेरी तस्वीरें आपको वाकई अच्छी लगती हैं तो फिर मैं बना दूँ। तो उन्होंने भी मुझे फ़ोन नहीं किया, मैं भी आराम से बैठी रही, लेकिन वो कुछ दिमाग में चीज़ घूमती रही। तो इत्तेफाक से किसी के पास एक रोल था कागज़ का जो बहुत बड़ा था, वो मैंने ख़रीद लिया और मैंने एक बहुत बड़ी ब्लैक एंड वाइट तस्वीर ये बनाई। और उन्होंने मुझे फिर दोबारा कभी फ़ोन नहीं किया, लेकिन ये तस्वीर जो थी और इसके साथ की फिर 3-4 और जो तस्वीरें थी उनमें मुझे बहुत लुत्फ़ आया। तो कभी कभी ऐसी भी तस्वीर बन जाती है। और फिर इत्तेफाक की बात ये कि कहीं बैनुल अक़वामी मेले में भेज दिया, वहाँ पे उसको कुछ तमगा शमगा मिल गया, वो बहुत पैसों में बिक भी गई और बहुत अय्याशी हो गई मेरी कोई 3 महीने के लिए। और ये एक टेलीफोन कॉल की वजह से हुआ और मैं उन खातून का बहुत ज़्यादा ममनून। ये भी उसी ज़माने की तस्वीर है जिसमें ये पौधे और कुछ ये दरवाजे थे। ये तस्वीर कलकत्ते से आने के बाद बनाई थी मैंने। इसमें वो रंग जो वहाँ पाए और फीमेल फॉर्म जो अभी तक थी जो चाहती है कि उड़े। It's sort of this business of flight, taking off in this painting. उसके बाद साल भर के लिए मैं अमेरिका चली गई और कुछ अपने वक्त को ज़रा इस तरह से सर्व करने के लिए कि ख़ास मेरे काम के लिए ही हो, उसके लिए मैं कह दूं कि बड़ा ज़रूरी होता है कि जिस शख्स के साथ आप रह रहे हैं वो भी ताउन करे। I hope Shoaib is not here, so I don't have to say anything positive about him. But this is only possible because one could have somebody else playing the mother's role. Another problem, of course, with women who are devoted to something, this business of, how do you arrange your life so that you can spend time focusing in what you're doing. This is a result of some works that I did there. I call them inner landscapes. वहाँ पे जाके ज़ाहिर है वतन की याद बहुत ज़्यादा आई, खेत, पानी, पौधे। और जहाँ पे मैं थी वो जगह बहुत खूबसूरत थी, लेकिन वो एक आँख नहीं भा रही थी इसलिए क्योंकि याद बहुत तंग कर रही थी। तो आई डिड दी सीरीज ऑफ ड्राइंग्स जिसमें एक अंदर का मंजर था और एक बाहर का मंजर था और उनका आपस में कोई ताल्लुक, बातचीत। ये भी उसी ज़माने की है। बहुत लोग याद आए उस ज़माने में, अब्बा भी बहुत याद आए, तो शायरी भी पढ़ रही थी। तो ये दस्ते तहे संग जो उन्वान था उससे मुतासिर होकर मैंने कुछ बहुत छोटी छोटी तस्वीरें बनाई। वहाँ पे कमरा मेरा छोटा था और इनमें हाथ, बढ़ते हुए हाथ जो कि अब जो भी कमिटमेंट है उससे इनकार नहीं कर सकते। हाथ मेरे लिए बहुत अहम है क्योंकि उनमें इतना कुछ, उनके ज़रिए उनको देख के बहुत सी चीज़ों का इजहार किया जा सकता। और वापसी पे जिस दिन मैं पहुंची उसके दूसरे दिन बेनज़ीर भुट्टो की जो हुकूमत थी उसको खारिज कर दिया गया था, छुट्टी हो गई उनकी। और मैं अपनी खिड़की के बाहर देख रही थी और अंदर मैं थी और बाहर मुझे लगा कि वो ऐसा था जैसे कि बहुत से तूफ़ान थे, बहुत से वादे जो कि अधूरे रह गए थे। और ये हर खिड़की के बीच में, हर खिड़की की विंडो पेन में एक मुख्तलिफ तासुर। This was also done at the same time, where the tree that I was looking at suddenly became alive with very stark, very somber, very threatening forms, and it was just a reflection of what I was feeling inside as I was looking out during that week. The Gulf War was another, I think, milestone in which it was very difficult to do anything because I think I was so disturbed and so traumatized. And I only came to life when one of my students, Zubair, in fact, when she said, she's going to do an exhibition in Karachi, and that goaded me into at least saying something about it. And so I did a series of 3 or 4 works, which were, I don't think they were successful because I think I was just too emotional. I was not able to distance myself from that, but it had to do with women, with hands, with a great deal of pain. then into doorways, light, darkness to begin with, and moving towards light and movement. Still hands reaching out. And then it stopped at this point when I was doing something which is a mixture of a lot of things that had been happening for 5 years. Lots of works that had been happening for 5 years, in which there was the female form in the middle. There were some old pictures of myself that I used, from a very long time ago. The hands, the movement, the dark, the light, the red, the black, everything coming together at one time in a great deal of movement and possibly turmoil also. Nahid Siddiqui, I think to me symbolizes a woman who is unwilling to compromise in her commitment to her work. And I think I saw her at this particular moment in time as a woman who chose between several options, and she chose love for her work. And so I call this series a homage to love. It was really celebrating one woman's conviction. And this is of the same series. This yellow form in the middle came from a tree. Trees have also been an image that has been important to me, which is why I feel very close to my father's poem called Sham. It's a painter's poem, really. And this is one of the works that you'll see. It's back to front. It's in the exhibition. The large surface. I was feeling the joy of a surface. I think there's sensuality in cloth, and so it was really an expression of that, because I saw this wonderful image of this woman with a chadar, the 2 or 3 women together, and she's half looking out, and I just fell in love with her sense of self-assurance. And she was a woman who I could reach out to and to bring her into my painting and make it part of it, and then continue that feeling of delight in the surface and sensuality by working on the empty space and making it into a thin, light malmal chadar. I'll just finish with that image. These are very tiny little paintings which I did recently. They're in a medium that very few people do. It's egg tempera. It's very slow and very laborious. In fact, the exhibition is right now on in Islamabad. They're little landscapes, and they're in 2 series, one called Red Monsoon and one called Passion Clouds. And they're not landscapes in the conventional sense. They're just feelings which I've translated into landscapes. And I was wanting to use landscape because the British landscape tradition, which lives in Pakistan today in a lot of people's work, is to my mind an outsider's way of looking at landscape. In this I was translating what I was feeling inside into little tiny, small, very private, very passionate landscapes. I think that's all.